Welcome to the Open to Hope Show in partnership with the Compassionate Friends. I'm your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, and I'm here today with my mom and co-host, Dr. Gloria Horsley. Our guest is here with me in the studio, which is great because she goes to NYU and lives here in New York. And her name is Molly Gandour, and she is a documentary filmmaker and producer of the Academy Award-nominated documentary Gasland. She is currently enrolled in a master's program at New York University, and her most recent documentary film, Peanut Gallery, was one of 8 documentaries that was selected to screen at Slamdance Film Festival in Park City, Utah. And it's based on the death of her 14-year-old sister, Aimee, to leukemia when Molly was just 10 years old. Molly has a fabulous documentary film. For anyone out there that really wants to understand sibling loss, watch this film.
I was wondering, oh my goodness, you went for a while without talking too much about it. I know as a parent, when you have a kid die in the family, it's, when Scott died, my daughter Heather was 14, you were younger. There are really some strange family dynamics because you don't know what to do with it, how to talk about it. Everybody's worried about each other. How did it go in your family?
It took me a long, long time to talk about it. I mean, I started making the film 16 years after she died, and during the filmmaking process was really the first time that my parents and I spoke in depth about my sister's death. I think we didn't know how to talk about it, and we didn't know where to begin, and my parents really had no idea what I was going through, is what I learned during the filming. I mean, they were so surprised that I'd been holding this in for so long.
Now, she died of leukemia when she was 14 and you were 10. Were you just kind of the quiet one while everybody was focusing on her?
She was diagnosed at age 6, so when I was 2. So for much of my childhood, my early years, I remember her as being sick or that there was the threat of illness. So it was a big part of growing up to me and to who she was, and it was pretty normal to me in a way. So I think I had a kind of special lens on who she was because I didn't see her, I think, as sick as much as outsiders did. I didn't look at her and see a cancer kid. I saw my sister. It's how, what she'd always been like.
How do you think it impacted your growing up years?
Well, I think, actually, I wasn't the quiet one. I was sort of the clown of the family. So I think I felt a lot of pressure to be upbeat and to keep my sister entertained and to kind of stay out of the way. I knew that my sister's problems were very real and, life and death, literally. And I knew that my task was to just kind of not create problems for the family, So I kind of did well in school and kept my mouth shut. That's
a lot of responsibility. And I remember in the trailer, your mom saying that she called you the ray of sunshine.
That's right.
So yeah. You were that person in the family, like you said, you got good grades, you didn't create problems because, like you said, your sister's illness probably took up a lot of emotional and psychological space in the family.
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, it did, and I didn't realize that as a kid that that's what was going on. But I think also after she died, I continued in that vein because, it was such a formative part of my personality. My sister was sick for so long when I was growing up, and whatever it was in my personality, I took on this role of my own accord, being the ray of sunshine for my family. And after she was gone, I think I felt that same responsibility to not cause problems for my family and not cause a scene. I felt that my problems weren't as important as hers had been, and so that's kind of what led to me not telling my parents for almost 2 decades that I was upset about this, not kind of realizing how it had impacted me to act that way for so long.
Do you feel like you minimized your own grief?
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, which is so often the case in sibling loss, and even more so with you, given the way your sister died. So how did you get to a place where you almost didn't even acknowledge your loss, almost didn't even feel like you had the right to it, and minimized it, which I hear so much in siblings, in all of us, to a place where you felt like, okay, now I have to tell my story. I had a loss too, and this was significant, and this had a huge impact on my life.
Well, I felt like I had to be strong, because that's how I felt when Aimee was sick. And I also heard her getting praised a lot for facing her illness with courage and stoicism and not complaining, which, she was sort of amazingly good-natured about having cancer. And, despite the fact that she had leukemia, got very good grades and did amazing craft projects and sold beaded necklaces to nurses at the hospital. She was always working on something. She was very, and people praised her for that. And so I was aware, and I idolized her. I looked up to her. So that was kind of my model. The transition from college kind of into the real world where I started to really feel kind of disconnected and disassociated with what I was trying to do with my life and realized that I was having a hard time, being in relationships and having a hard time. I was working in documentary and television and was ostensibly doing well. I was starting a career, I guess, but not able to kind of feel like I was enjoying it or feeling connected to it.
What's interesting, Molly, is you were telling other people's stories. And then you move from telling other people's stories to telling your own story.
Yeah.
I love that shift.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one thing. You talk about your parents' response. I think we often talk about parents as some kind of a unit. Did your father have a different response than your mother to making this thing and to having you be at the place that you were at and asking him to discuss this or your mom to discuss it?
Well, first of all, to say that my parents have both been incredibly supportive throughout the entire process, and I feel very, very lucky because I know that it's possible that wouldn't be the case. My dad has been a very good sport, I don't think that it's exactly the sort of thing that he would ever initiate or want to do of his own accord, but he, immediately got on board and saw, could see that it was something that I really needed to do or wanted to do and was game.
I love in the movie too, in the film where you are at dinner and your dad says something like, you and your mom are talking about the death of your sister, and your dad says something like, look, I can't talk about this 24 hours a day. I need to take a break. And it just shows the difference in the way that people process loss and grief and heal.
Totally. And my parents are very different in their kind of emotional metabolisms and how they express themselves. And I think that they actually had a bit of an understanding between the two of them as to, that dynamic. But I wasn't aware. I was kind of never brought into that conversation of how the three of us each were individually processing. But yeah, my dad is sort of man who's not interested to talk about his emotions all day. And he'll do it if he needs to, but it's not,
I like that because I think a lot of men can identify with that.
Yeah.
What did your parents learn about sibling loss after you did this documentary?
Oh, man. We both learned so much. I think they just had no idea the extent of the impact that this had all had on me, and neither did I. And I was just saying before we started that I read The Empty Room, Elizabeth DeVita Rayburn's book, early on, as did my mother.
I love that, and I'm one of the 77 siblings that she interviewed in there.
Yeah.
She named me Amanda, I think.
Yeah.
I am Amanda. I've been outed.
Yeah.
It's a great book. I would highly recommend it to any bereaved sibling that's listening to the show.
Yeah, I
or parent.
recommend it to people all the time. And that was really that kind of opened up a whole world to both of us. And yeah, and then I started going back and as you say, really being able to piece together my story and tell my story, because I didn't really know that I had a story. You know, it was always just something that had happened to me that was kind of normal to me. You know, it had just been there with my life and the illness and then the death. And yeah, it wasn't until I went back that I realized how deeply it was integrated with how my personality developed and then how my adolescence went and, you know, my relationship with my parents and everything. What I say now is that every person's grief, I think, is as different as the relationship they had to the bereaved person. You know, there are as many types of grief as there are types of human relationships, I think. And so I think it can be very tricky with families because you know, each person grieves in a different way and they each had a different relationship, and it's obviously very emotional and deep and you know, it can be very sensitive to get into that stuff and kind of stir up those emotions. But I think it's so entirely necessary. I mean, it's helped me in so many ways to speak with my parents about the loss of my sister, not only for my relationship to them, but also for my relationships in other parts of my life.
I'm thinking part of it is, and Heidi said it was your story to tell, that we do all have a right to our story.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true, Mom, because I think one of the things that, as a bereaved sibling, that I experienced is, and that other people that I've talked to experience, is we get messages from society. People say things to us like, you know, be strong for your parents. They've had the worst loss you can ever imagine. You know, don't make waves. And, you know, so we sometimes don't feel like we have the right to our own story, you know, and that we have to shelf it. And we are worried about our parents. So we and we don't want to upset them even further because they've been through so much. So sometimes we hide how we are feeling so that, like, you know, like like being said today by Molly, so that, you know, we don't create any more problems. We don't create waves. We don't want to upset them.
I'm wondering, one thing that comes up for me, and I would ask both of you, are there some anger issues sometimes that you don't want to bring up? Some things that you didn't like?
Definitely. And actually what I would like to add is that this process also helped me gain a lot of empathy for my parents, because being able to vent that anger and having them understand, because I mean, I'm not kidding when I say they really were like so surprised by a lot of this stuff. I mean, it hadn't occurred to them, you know, and being able to tell them and be understood, and also then helped me to hear their stories and imagine their experiences, you know, because I was 10 when my sister died. So now, looking back as an adult, I can imagine, you know, what it would be like to go. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can more closely imagine what it would be like to go through that experience as an adult, you know, and my mother going to all of the hospital visits and you know, being there with my sister in that way. I gained a lot of empathy for how intense that experience must have been for her, and also in speaking more with my father, gained more empathy for his kind of approach too, because I think because he's not the most communicative, expressive person about his emotions, I kind of thought maybe he didn't have emotions or maybe he wasn't feeling anything about it. But I learned, you know, that he was, and he was aware of it, and he was sort of consciously dealing with it in his own way. And so knowing all that stuff, was, enormously helpful.
And I bet that they, in turn, felt much more connected and empathic towards your grief process as a bereaved sibling. And were able to put themselves in your shoes. I think that's so key in families. If we can just kind of try to think about what the other person is going through, it does help in so many ways. I also thought it was interesting about the car experience. You're talking to your mother about her emotions, and she's not able to talk about her own anger.
That's a sort of common dynamic that I have with my mother, actually. And one of the more surprising, in a good way, responses that I've had to the film, to people watching the film, is people coming up to me afterwards and saying, "Oh my God, I've had that exact conversation with my mother," or "Oh my God, I've had that exact conversation with my daughter." So I think it's something that people relate to. People can always check my website.
What is your website?
Give us your website.
It's www.peanutgallerydoc.com. And it'll be updated information there.
Thank you, Molly, so much for doing this and for being a voice for bereaved siblings everywhere and for getting the message out there that our grief is as important as everybody else's.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, and can't wait to share the film with more folks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Molly, and I'm really going to look forward to seeing the film. Well, thank you for listening to this show today, and I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley. And Heidi and I always want to remind everyone that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours till you find your own, and God bless.
You've been listening to Open to Hope Radio, hosted by Drs. Gloria and Heidi Horsley. Like today's edition, all of our past programs are available on demand at opentohope.com, along with helpful articles, videos, resources, and links to help get you through the toughest time of your life. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Again, that's opentohope.com. Check it out today. Then be sure to stop by next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, when we'll be posting another edition of Open to Hope Radio. Remember, others have been where you are. They made it through, and you can too, as long as you're open to hope.